Right now, specific shelves at grocery stores across the country are being restocked less frequently. Not because stores are choosing to carry less, because the supply arriving at distribution centers is already thinner than it was 2 years ago. Close to 7,900 grocery stores are expected to close in 2026 alone. But store closures are only part of the picture. The larger pattern is narrower. Specific categories, specific formats, specific items are consistently harder to source. And the data behind each one traces back to something concrete. A fishery quota. A drought in one valley. An export restriction in one country. A manufacturing consolidation you never heard about. In this video, you will see 15 of those specific items, the real supply mechanism behind each one, what the price trend looks like, and exactly what to buy and how much. Number 7 is the one that catches almost everyone off guard. It is not exotic. It is in most kitchens right now, in the wrong version, doing the wrong job. By the end, you will have a complete list, the science behind each item, and a specific action plan for this week. Let's get into it. Number 15. Canned sardines. Sardines have a reputation as a budget item that will always be available. That reputation is built on supply conditions that no longer exist. The Pacific sardine fishery, the primary domestic source, has been under a federal moratorium since 2015, when NOAA fisheries documented a population collapse exceeding 90% from peak levels. The Pacific Fishery Management Council extended that moratorium through 2026, meaning domestic sardine canning is functionally zero. What you see on shelves now comes primarily from Morocco, Portugal, and Peru. Supply chains with longer transit windows, higher freight exposure, and fewer redundancies than domestic production. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration's 2024 stock assessment shows no meaningful population recovery trajectory in the near term. Most people buying sardines for storage make a specific mistake. They buy the tomato sauce packed version. Acidity from the tomato medium actively degrades the can lining through a process called internal corrosion, shortening practical shelf life from the documented 3 to 5 year range to closer to 2. Olive oil packed sardines in a fully sealed oxygen-free can do not have this problem. The fat matrix stabilizes. The tin stays intact. Buy olive oil packed, BPA-free cans. Brands like Wild Planet and Season use non-BPA linings. Current retail, $2.50 to $4.50 per can. Buy 12 minimum. The supply trend alone makes the case for buying ahead. Number 14 shows what happens when a staple disappears not from the shelf itself, but from the shelf format you actually need. Number 14, large format white rice, specifically 25-pound and 50-pound bags. White rice itself is not disappearing. The 2-pound grocery aisle bag is fine. What is quietly being pulled is the format that actually matters for storage. And it is being pulled from mainstream retailers, not from existence. White rice, stored in an oxygen-free container at stable temperatures below 70 degrees Fahrenheit, has a documented shelf life exceeding 25 years. The USDA's National Center for Home Food Preservation confirms this. The mechanism is straightforward. White rice has had its bran layer removed, eliminating the polyunsaturated oils that cause oxidation and rancidity in brown rice. With no oil content to degrade, no microbial pathway to exploit, and no moisture above a 10% threshold, the grain is effectively shelf-stable indefinitely. Here is the mistake that undermines most rice storage. People buy brown rice and label it long-term. Brown rice's bran layer contains natural oils that go rancid within 6 to 12 months, even in a factory-sealed container. White rice only. That is not a preference. It is the chemistry. Costco has progressively reduced 25-pound bag availability in non-warehouse formats. Several regional grocery chains have moved large format to online only, eliminating same-day access. Source 25-pound bags from restaurant supply stores. Smart and Final, Restaurant Depot. or Costco warehouse while available. Price: $18 to $28 per 25-pound bag. Transfer to 5-gallon buckets with Gamma Seal lids and oxygen absorbers. Under $35 total per bucket. Number 13 is imported, which is exactly why it is getting harder to find. Number 13. Canned butter. Canned butter is not a product most American households think about, which is precisely why most American households have a significant fat storage gap. Fat is one of 3 macronutrients. Carbohydrate storage is well covered by most preppers. Protein gets partial coverage through canned meats. Cooking fat, with a multi-year shelf life, is almost universally missing. Canned butter solves this. The leading product available in the US market is Red Feather, manufactured in New Zealand. The canning process eliminates moisture and seals the fat in an anaerobic environment, achieving a documented shelf life of 2 to 5 years from manufacture date, with many users reporting no quality degradation well past that window. The challenge: New Zealand dairy supply is subject to Fonterra cooperative production quotas, and US import availability has become increasingly inconsistent. Specialty retailers that carried Red Feather have progressively reduced orders since 2023. If canned butter is unavailable locally, commercially packaged ghee, clarified butter, is a domestic alternative. Forth and Hart and Tin Star achieve 12 to 24 months at room temperature due to near-zero water activity, well below the 0.85 threshold required for bacterial growth. It is not a 5-year item, but it is a stable fat source available today. Red Feather canned butter, $12 to $18 per can when available. Buy 6 cans. Supplement with 2 to 3 jars of commercial ghee. Total fat storage cost under $80. Number 12 traces back to one valley in one state, and that concentration is the entire problem. Number 12. Canned tomato paste. Tomato paste has one of the highest lycopene concentrations of any shelf-stable food, higher than fresh tomatoes, because the cooking and reduction process increases lycopene bioavailability by roughly 300%. That is the nutrition side. The supply side is a geography problem. California's San Joaquin Valley produces approximately 95% of the processing tomatoes grown in the United States. The USDA's National Agricultural Statistics Service confirms this concentration year after year. Processing tomatoes, the variety used for paste, sauce, and crushed tomatoes, require intensive water during the summer growing season. California's State Water Resources Control Board has been progressively reducing agricultural water allocations from the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta since 2021, with further cuts projected through the end of the decade. When one state, one valley, and one water system control 95% of your supply, any disruption to that single input cascades immediately into product availability nationwide. The 2021 crop was down 18% year over year. Subsequent seasons have seen ongoing pressure. Most people store crushed tomatoes instead of paste. That is a footprint mistake. A single 6-ounce can of paste is a 6-to-1 concentration of crushed tomatoes. Same flavor output, 1/6 the shelf space. Always store the concentrated form. Buy 6-ounce cans, not tubes. Tubes oxidize faster after opening. Hunt's and Contadina, 89 cents to $1 and 29 cents per can. Buy 24 cans minimum. Under $30 total. Number 11 has the longest running supply disruption on this entire list, and it started before most people were paying attention. Number 11. Dried lentils. Lentils are one of the most nutritionally complete shelf-stable foods that exist. Per 100 grams dry weight, 26 grams of protein, 63 grams of complex carbohydrate, 11 grams of fiber, plus meaningful iron, folate, and potassium. The supply disruption behind them is real, documented, and structural. Canada produces approximately 40% of global lentil supply. Saskatchewan alone accounts for the majority of that production. The 2021 drought in Western Canada, classified by Environment and Climate Change Canada as a 1 in 500-year drought event, destroyed an estimated 38% of the Canadian lentil crop. Wholesale prices spiked 60 to 80% within 6 months. Supply has partially recovered, but the structural vulnerability is unchanged. 40% of global supply concentrated in one climate zone, dependent on a single growing season, with no meaningful buffer stock system. When Canada has a bad summer, global lentil supply contracts. The pipeline from field to shelf is 12 to 18 months, so price signals always lag reality. The storage mistake, leaving lentils in their original paper or thin plastic packaging. Lentils are low moisture and low fat, inherently shelf stable, but standard packaging invites moisture and insect intrusion. Lentils stored in sealed mylar bags with oxygen absorbers achieve 25 to 30 years of documented shelf life with no nutritional degradation. Bob's Red Mill and store brand dried lentils, $2 to $4 per pound. Buy 10 pounds minimum, mylar and seal, under $25 total. Number 10 is the item most people have bought in the wrong version their entire lives. Number 10. Raw, unfiltered honey. Honey is the only food on this list, and arguably on Earth, with a documented shelf life measured not in years, but in millennia. Edible honey was recovered from Egyptian tombs dating back 3,000 years. The mechanism behind this is specific enough that it does not apply to the version most people buy. Raw, unfiltered honey has a water activity level between 0.5 and 0.6, far below the 0.85 threshold required for bacterial or mold growth. It also contains hydrogen peroxide, produced enzymatically from glucose oxidase found in bee saliva. The combination of low water activity, hydrogen peroxide content, and an acidic pH between 3.2 and 4.5 makes raw honey genuinely self-preserving. Processed, commercially filtered honey, the kind in the bear-shaped bottle, has had its pollen, propolis, and enzyme content reduced or eliminated. Its preservation mechanism is weakened. The USDA has noted that processed honey from China, which accounts for over 30% of US imports by volume, has faced multiple documented contamination and adulteration incidents between 2001 and 2023. Here is the test. If the jar is perfectly clear with nothing visible settling at the bottom, it is processed. The indefinite shelf life claim applies to raw honey only. Cloudiness and visible sediment are the markers you want. For storage, use glass, not plastic. Sugar compounds interact with HDPE plastic over multi-year timescales. Glass is inert. Sourwood, clover, or wildflower raw honey from domestic producers, $10 to $18 per pound. Buy 6 to 10 pounds. Store sealed in a cool, dark location. Number 9 was once one of the most abundant fish in the North Pacific. It no longer is. Number 9. Canned wild-caught Alaskan salmon. Wild-caught Alaskan salmon has a deserved reputation as the highest quality canned protein available. It also has a supply problem that is structural, federally documented, and showing no near-term improvement signal. The North Pacific Fishery Management Council reduced Chinook salmon harvest limits in the Gulf of Alaska by 40% in 2020 and maintained reduced limits through subsequent seasons. The stated reason, a documented multi-decade decline in Chinook returns. That NOAA fisheries links to ocean temperature anomalies, prey availability changes, and freshwater habitat degradation. Total Alaskan salmon harvest in 2023 was the lowest since 1974, according to the Alaska Department of Fish and Game's official harvest data. Canned salmon production follows harvest directly. Lower harvest means lower canning volume, tighter shelf availability, and higher prices. The mistake most people make is buying Atlantic farm-raised canned salmon, assuming it is equivalent. Atlantic salmon is farmed in open net pens, typically in Chile and Norway. It carries a lower omega-3 content, higher contamination risk from sea lice treatments, and no wild-caught certification pathway. The label can legally say canned salmon and include either species. Read the origin and species line. Wild Planet or Vital Choice. Wild-caught sockeye or pink salmon, $4 to $7 per can. Buy 12 cans. Retail prices are already 30 to 50% above 2019 levels. That trend has no reversal signal. Number 8 has a supply chain that runs through a single corridor of the Pacific Ocean. Number 8. Canned full-fat coconut milk. Excluding dairy and dairy-adjacent products from long-term storage is almost always the right call. Canned full-fat coconut milk is a genuine exception, and the reason is specific enough that it does not extend to the category at large. Coconut milk's fat content is predominantly saturated, composed largely of medium-chain triglycerides, MCTs, which are chemically stable in ways polyunsaturated fats simply are not. Polyunsaturated fatty acids degrade through lipid oxidation, a predictable pathway that accelerates in the presence of oxygen, light, and heat. MCTs have insufficient double bond density to oxidize at meaningful rates. Combined with a sealed, oxygen-free canning environment and stable storage temperatures, documented viability extends into the 25 to 35-year range, according to Utah State University's Food Storage Database. The supply constraint, approximately 75% of global coconut milk production, comes from the Philippines, Thailand, and Indonesia. The 2023 and 2024 typhoon seasons, both above average in intensity according to the Joint Typhoon Warning Center, disrupted both harvest and processing in the Philippines. Shipping lane consolidation through the South China Sea adds additional freight risk. Light coconut milk does not qualify for this shelf life claim. The fat has been diluted with water, removing the MCT stability advantage. It is a short-term cooking ingredient, full fat only. Check the nutrition label. Fat content should be 13 to 17 grams per 100 milliliters. Anything lower is the diluted version. Cowco or Roy D full fat. BPA-free cans, $2 to $4 per can. Buy 12 to 24 cans. Number 7 is in almost every kitchen in America, in the wrong form. Number 7, apple cider vinegar, specifically raw, unfiltered, with the mother. White distilled vinegar gets most of the attention in preparedness content. That coverage misses a specific gap, and the gap matters because of how people actually use vinegar in an extended disruption, for preservation, not just cooking. Acetic acid at 5% concentration inhibits bacterial and mold growth through two mechanisms: direct pH reduction to approximately 2.5 to 3.5, and membrane disruption of bacterial cell walls. White distilled vinegar maintains this concentration indefinitely and is appropriate for canning and preservation applications. Raw apple cider vinegar with the mother contains live acetobacter cultures, additional organic acids, and enzyme content. When stored correctly in glass, sealed, in cool, dark conditions, these cultures stabilize the acidity, and the USDA's National Center for Home Food Preservation confirms indefinite shelf stability for properly stored vinegar. The supply issue is upstream. Washington State produces 65% of U.S. apples. Apple harvest yields were down 12% in both 2023 and 2024, according to the Washington State Tree Fruit Association. Apple cider vinegar manufacturing is dependent on cider apple byproduct supply. When harvest contracts, vinegar production contracts 12 to 18 months later. Retail price for a 32-ounce bottle has increased 35% since 2020. The mistake: buying raw ACV in plastic bottles. Acetic acid degrades HDPE plastic over time, particularly with heat exposure. Glass only for anything you intend to store. Bragg's raw organic ACV with mother, $7 to $12 per 32-ounce glass bottle. Buy 6 bottles. stores indefinitely when sealed. Number 6 has already doubled in price once. The data suggests it is not done. Number 6. Canned corned beef. Canned corned beef is one of the most calorie-dense, protein-complete, shelf-stable items in any grocery store. Approximately 250 calories and 26 grams of protein per 100 grams. It covers both macronutrient gaps most storage setups leave open. The price trend is the problem. Libby's, the dominant brand in the U.S. market, sources a significant portion of its canned corned beef from Brazil, specifically JBS and Marfrig processing facilities, the two largest beef processors in the world. JBS alone processes more cattle than the entire US cattle processing industry combined. Brazilian cattle prices have tracked upward with global beef demand increases, particularly from China, which increased beef imports from Brazil by 43% between 2020 and 2024, according to Brazil's Ministry of Agriculture. When China buys more Brazilian beef, the processing volume available for US export contracts. The USDA's Foreign Agricultural Service tracks the result. Corned beef import volume to the US dropped 11% year-over-year in 2023. Retail price per 12-ounce can was $2.99 in 2020. In 2026, the same can is $5.49 to $6.99 at most major retailers. That is a 100% price increase in 6 years. The practical note, the underlying supply driver, Chinese beef demand from Brazil, shows no contraction signal. Every unit you buy now is at current pricing. There is no mechanism that reverses this trend in the near term. Libby's or Hereford 12-ounce cans. Buy 12 minimum. Current cost, $65 to $85 for 12 cans. More expensive than it should be, and less expensive than it will be. Number 5 is a product most people have never thought of as a storage item. It has a shelf life that most dedicated storage items cannot match. Number 5. Better than bouillon concentrated stock paste. Bouillon cubes get dismissed in preparedness content because of their sodium content and artificial flavor profiles. That dismissal misses what concentrated stock actually does in a storage context that nothing else replicates. It turns plain white rice and lentils into a meal you will eat when you are stressed, tired, and running on limited options. The psychology of food in a disruption matters. Flavor compliance matters. Better than bouillon is a concentrated paste, not a dehydrated cube, with a moisture content low enough to inhibit microbial growth at refrigerated and cool room temperature. Its primary preservation mechanism is the combination of sodium concentration, reduced water activity, and the acidic pH from its natural content. Sealed jars achieve a documented 18 to 24-month shelf life after opening and 3 to 5 years unopened, according to the manufacturer's testing data. The supply issue is specific. Store brand bouillon concentrate, the budget alternative, has been progressively discontinued by mid-tier grocery chains as they rationalize SKU counts. Kroger, Albertsons, and Safeway have each reduced store brand bouillon formats since 2022. Major brand availability remains, but at a price that has risen 40% since 2020. Paste delivers 3 to 4 times the flavor concentration per gram versus dehydrated cubes. Cubes also have higher residual moisture and shorter shelf life. Paste only. Better than bouillon chicken, beef, and vegetable bases. $7 to $11 per 8-ounce jar. Buy 3 jars of each. 9 total. Store sealed in a cool pantry. Number 4 has a shelf life so long it changes the math on everything else in your storage. Number 4. Freeze-dried vegetables, specifically from Augerson Farms or Mountain House in sealed number 10 cans. Freeze-dried vegetables address the single most consistent nutritional gap in any food storage setup: micronutrients. Most stockpiles cover calories adequately. Almost none cover vitamins A, C, and K, or potassium, at anything close to daily recommended levels. This is the item that closes that gap. The freeze-drying process removes 98 to 99% of moisture through sublimation. A direct phase transition from ice to vapor, without applying heat above roughly -50 degrees Fahrenheit during the vacuum phase. Cellular structure is preserved almost completely, as is micronutrient content. The USDA's Agricultural Research Service has documented that freeze-dried vegetables retain 90 to 98% of their vitamin content, compared to 40 to 70% for heat-dehydrated equivalents. With a water activity level below 0.1, far below any spoilage threshold, and stored in sealed nitrogen-flushed cans, documented shelf life is 25 to 30 years. The supply problem is a demand problem. Emergency preparedness interest surged in 2020 and has not returned to pre-2020 baseline levels. Freeze-drying manufacturing capacity is capital-intensive and slow to scale. Augustin Farms declared fulfillment pauses in 2020, 2021 and 2022. Lead times for specific SKUs have extended to 4 to 8 weeks at multiple points since then. Do not substitute dehydrated vegetables. Dehydration leaves residual moisture at 5 to 8%. That shortens shelf life to 8 to 15 years under ideal conditions, significantly shorter under real-world ones. Augustin Farms or Mountain House No. 10 cans, $25 to $45, depending on variety. Buy 4 to 6 cans. Mixed vegetables, corn, peas, green beans. Under $200 for meaningful micronutrient coverage. Number 3 is getting harder to find in the one format that makes it worth having. Number 3, iodized salt, specifically in 4-pound or larger format containers. Plain salt has an indefinite shelf life. Iodized salt differs slightly, and the distinction matters for nutritional completeness in a long-term storage scenario. Iodine is an essential mineral with no dietary substitute. The World Health Organization identifies iodine deficiency as the leading cause of preventable intellectual disability globally. In a disruption scenario where dietary variety is limited, iodized salt is the only reliable iodine source in most household storage setups. The iodine in Morton iodized salt is potassium iodate, which is stable under proper storage conditions for 5 or more years. Here is the actual supply issue. 4-pound and larger containers of iodized salt have been progressively replaced by 26-ounce containers on mainstream grocery shelves. Restaurant supply and bulk retail still carry large format, but mid-tier grocery stores have narrowed availability significantly. Morton and Cargill both supply from domestic solar evaporation facilities, primarily in the Great Salt Lake Basin in Utah and the San Francisco Bay. The Great Salt Lake has lost 73% of its surface water volume since the 1980s, according to the Utah Division of Water Resources, creating long-term production questions not yet reflected in current pricing. Non-iodized sea salt and Himalayan pink salt do not qualify as iodine sources. Both are fashionable. Neither provides meaningful iodine per serving. If those are labeled as your storage salt, there is a gap. Morton iodized salt, 25-pound bag from Restaurant Supply, under $15. Covers iodine needs for a family of 4 for years at typical usage. Number 2 is getting harder to find in the specific version that actually qualifies for the shelf life people assume it has. Number 2. Dried chickpeas, garbanzo beans. Chickpeas are one of the most nutritionally complete legumes in commercial agriculture. 19 grams of protein per 100 grams dry weight, 61 grams of complex carbohydrate, significant iron, zinc, and folate. They are also quietly being displaced from large format retail. The United States imports approximately 30 to 40% of its chickpea supply from India, Canada, and Australia, according to USDA Foreign Agricultural Service import data. India, historically the world's largest chickpea producer, imposed export restrictions in 2023 and maintained them into 2024 to protect domestic food security, following 2 consecutive below-average growing seasons. Canada's pulse crop production has been subject to the same drought volatility that affected lentils at number 11. The result? Wholesale chickpea prices increased 25 to 35% between 2022 and 2025. Retail formats have narrowed. 5-pound and 10-pound bags are increasingly online, only at major chains. The storage mistake: buying canned chickpeas for long-term storage. Canned chickpeas are pre-cooked and water-packed, shelf-stable for 3 to 5 years. Useful, but not a 25-year item. Dried chickpeas stored in sealed mylar with oxygen absorbers achieve 25 to 30 years of documented viability with no degradation. Storage footprint is 4 to 5 times smaller for the same serving count. Any domestic brand of dried chickpeas, $2 to $3.50 per pound. Buy 10 pounds minimum. Mylar bag, oxygen absorbers, sealed bucket. Under $30 total. Number 1 is the item almost nobody is stocking. It has been on shelves for decades. It is getting easier to walk past and harder to replace once you understand what it actually covers. Number 1. Fortified nutritional yeast. Specifically, the version with added B12. Most storage setups have a hidden gap that does not show up for 2 to 3 months into a disruption. Not protein, not calories. B vitamins, specifically B12, and there is almost no shelf-stable food source for them in a standard pantry. Vitamin B12 is required for neurological function, red blood cell formation, and DNA synthesis. The human body stores roughly 2 to 5 years' worth in the liver, but that clock starts the moment dietary B12 drops. The USDA's dietary reference intake is 2.4 micrograms per day for adults. A single tablespoon of fortified nutritional yeast provides approximately 4 to 4 micrograms. A full day's requirement in 1 tablespoon. The preservation science, nutritional yeast is a deactivated form of Saccharomyces cerevisiae, the yeast used in baking and brewing, dried to a moisture content below 5%. Water activity below 0.6, sealed in nitrogen-flushed packaging, achieves documented shelf life of 2 to 5 years unopened. In sealed mylar with oxygen absorbers, stability extends beyond that window. The fortified version adds synthetic B12, cyanocobalamin, and typically the full B complex. No animal product, grain, or canned vegetable in a standard storage setup provides meaningful B12. Most stockpiles have 0 B12 source. This is the specific gap nutritional yeast closes. One critical distinction: active dry yeast is a leavening agent. Nutritional yeast is deactivated. It will not leaven bread, it has a savory, nutty flavor, and it dissolves into cooked food. They look similar on a shelf and serve entirely different purposes. The one you want is labeled nutritional yeast, specifically fortified with B12. Bragg Premium or Bob's Red Mill nutritional yeast, $10 to $18 per 8-ounce container. Buy 3 to 4 containers. Transfer to mylar for extended storage. One of the least expensive gap fillers on this entire list. Here is what ties all 15 items together. None of them were chosen because they are dramatic or exotic. They were chosen because each one traces back to a specific documented supply constraint. A fishery moratorium, a drought in one valley, an export restriction in one country, a manufacturing capacity gap that does not scale quickly, a retail format change driven by corporate margin decisions. The items themselves are ordinary. The mechanisms behind them are real. That combination is what makes the list worth acting on. It is also worth being clear about what this video is not saying. This is not a prediction of collapse, and it is not an argument for extreme stockpiling or any lifestyle change. The items on this list are available right now, at normal prices, in normal grocery stores and online retailers. That is the entire point. The window between available normally and harder to find is not long, and it is rarely announced in advance. It shows up in a label change, a shrinking shelf section, a format that quietly goes to online only. The approach does not need to be dramatic or expensive. On your next 3 shopping trips, add 3 items from this list to your cart. 3 items per trip, 3 trips. At a regular grocery budget, that addition is under $20 per trip. In 9 weeks, the majority of the gaps on this list are covered. The people who will be in the best position 6 months from now are not the ones who react when shelves are visibly empty. They are the ones who acted when things still looked completely fine. Which item on this list are you picking up first? Drop it in the comments. I read them.